Good morning, everyone, and welcome to NorthStar Community Online and in-person service. So glad that you're joining us today. So we'll get a little bit of a late start here. We had a bunch of special things going on today. We had our graduation recognition, and we had communion. So if you're hungry, we got lunch going right now. So you want to show up at Walnut Grove, come on over. So anyway, we're going to start talking about David from the Bible sort of today, but we're going to start doing a series on him because he's such a great illustration of how perfectionist isn't required to be loved by God, and that we can make lots of mistakes and still be okay in God's eyes. So it's always the problem with us with addiction is that we have this way of looking at perfectionism as a requirement, and then of course we figure out ways to loathe ourselves and dislike ourselves. And so I just want to keep this ahead, keep it going and going on how we're forgiven for what we've done. We can move forward. There's nothing holding us up. So today, actually, let me read scripture first here. This is Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is in the Old Testament. But luckier than the dead or the living is the person who has never even been, who has never seen the bad business that takes place on this earth. Think about how many of us when we're at the bottom of the pit, when we're at rock bottom, when we've come to want to give up on life, how that sounds so tempting. But I hope that as long as we're here, we find ways to find purpose in our life and to become clean and sober and to not live our lives in anger and resentment, but find ways to love. Then I observed all the work and ambition motivated by envy. What a waste, smoke, and spitting into the wind. The fool sits back and takes it easy. His sloth is slow suicide. One handful of peaceful repose is better than two fistfuls of worried work. More spitting into the wind. I turned my head and saw yet another wisp of smoke on its way to nothingness. A solitary person, completely alone, no children, no family, no friends, yet working obsessively late into the night, compulsively greedy for more and more, never bothering to ask, why am I working like a dog, never having fun, and who cares? More smoke, a bad business. It's better to have a partner than go it alone. Share the work, share the wealth, and if one falls down, the other helps. But if there's no one to help, tough. By yourself, you're unprotected. With a friend, you can face the worst. Can you round up a third? A three-stranded rope isn't easily snapped. And we know how in addiction, we want to live with bravado and push everybody away. Our porcupine index is high. We make sure that no one's going to get to know us real well because everybody's going to hurt us and everybody's harmed us and you can't trust anybody and there's no friends and nobody cares about us, right? Not true. Now, a lot of times it's our decision-making that gets us there. So finally, I'll quit reading these wonderful, positive scriptures here. A poor youngster with some wisdom is better off than an old but foolish king who doesn't know which end is up. I saw a youth just like this start with nothing and go from rags to riches. And I saw everyone rally to the rule of this young successor to the king. Even so, the excitement died quickly. The throngs of people soon lost interest. Can't you see it's only smoke and spitting into the wind? So today, I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about, and I want to start talking about David from the Old Testament. For you that don't know much about the Bible, David is a revered icon for the Jewish religion and for our Christian religion. They even refer to themselves as the Davidic religion. That's about David. So David is one of my favorite people to study because he was so great. I mean, he did so many things right. He was a great warrior, musician, king, all these things he did so well. I mean, he defeated one enemy after another. He was brave. He was courageous, all these things. But at the same time, he was so flawed. He made so many mistakes. I guess the bigger you are, the bigger your mistakes are. and he harmed so many people, caused so many people to die. Of course, just so many things he did that were wrong, and he ended up being seen as a great king, but he was not a very good father, and he had lots of chaos and problems in his own household, sexual assault, murder, all these things. So David is just this story of a Renaissance man who was so talented, skilled, and he loved God. He worked so hard to focus on God. He just couldn't keep it together. So I said, well, the way I'm going to start talking about David is I'm going to talk about one of my most interesting people that I consider in my life is Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong just fascinates me. I don't know why. I've tried to figure this out. I've read every book he's written. I've read about every book written about him. I've seen every documentary about him. I've seen documentaries that are both wildly positive and those that are wildly negative about him. So Lance Armstrong, I guess we could say, was a wildly talented guy. For probably anyone, if you're in your 20s, you may not know who I'm talking about, but I think anybody above that, he probably was the most famous athlete besides Michael Jordan in the 90s and early 2000s. He was, his story is that he was this kid who came from a broken home. He was poor, had some amazing skills and talents in, some reason he was built to have a absolute unbelievable cardio in him, and he could do lots of endurance races better than most people. And probably the thing that we think about him that defines him is he had stage 4 cancer and really should have died. Within 2 years, he won the Tour de France, which is the most awful, grueling endurance sport out there in cycling. It's like 3 weeks of 120 miles a day, riding on a bike over some of the worst hills and dangerous roads and all these things. Sometimes the average speed at sometimes in these races is like 25 to 29 miles an hour. That's the average speed. It's amazing, and I will tell you, I love cycling, so that's some of the reason why I'm fascinated by this. But he was amazing. His oxygen intake was incredible. He was skilled on his bike. He was a great strategist. He had this absolute will to win. He absolutely hated to lose. He also loved to make other people lose. I always think another cyclist who was on his team said, I always wanted to win, and Lance Armstrong always wanted to win, but I never wanted to win at the expense of others, where Lance enjoyed winning at the expense of others. They were telling a story about he was doing a bike ride just around in Austin for charity, and a little 10-year-old boy, he was riding with 10, I think like 8 to 12-year-olds, and this little 10-year-old boy was getting close to the finish line, and he would have won, and Lance Armstrong went up and actually beat him to the finish line. That just tells you what kind of guy Lance Armstrong was. But the key for Lance Armstrong, as we talk about all the time here, he had a lot of abandonment, trauma in his life, and he was not held accountable for a lot of things he did as a kid. And so he just became more and more angry and resentful. He became agnostic. One of the things that certainly differentiates Lance Armstrong from King David is David absolutely cared every day about what God thought of him and what he was doing, where Lance Armstrong has turned his back on any kind of spiritual stuff. So Lance Armstrong was a tough guy. So sorry about that. I tried to stop that. Him and his mother were very close at a dysfunctional level. She definitely overfunctioned in his life. Certainly confused boundaries there. Blindly loyal support to Lance when he really didn't deserve it. Just interesting that Lance became such a huge star in a very obscure sport But then he made it popular. I think the billions of dollars he made for some of the bike companies, all those Nike, Oakley, amazing what he made them. But he was mean and cruel. He was brash. He expected absolute loyalty. He expected to get his needs met. All of his other riders were there to make Lance happy. He was arrogant. He was taunting, impulsive, mean. He destroyed anybody got in his way. I go down the list of people. Betsy Andrew stood up to him, and he described her as horrible. And one of the masseuses on the team finally came forward and became honest about what happened, and he labeled her as a whore and all these things, and he just was cruel, and he still is, I think, to this day. And I think he's got it a little bit. So here's this guy. So just like David, here's this guy who's doing so many things. In this case, I've described what he did wrong, but he did so many things wrong. He was mean, arrogant, destroyed people around him, didn't care. All he cared about was him. We have King David, who, on the other hand, would do so many things right. He was considered a great king. And then he would do the dumbest things and harm people. So Lance Armstrong, let's look at him for a minute. So all this time he's going on, as I told you earlier, he had stage 4 cancer. He probably should have died, but he didn't. And he created the Live Strong Foundation. It was just amazing. I mean, this thing is still amazing. I mean, they created so much awareness for cancer. They raised millions and millions of dollars for cancer research. They would talk about this guy who, when he would walk into a hospital and see kids, he would just sit and talk to them for hours. They would have to try to get him out to go where else he needed to be, and he would just not go. He was there for those kids, and he had a connection with them and the other cancer survivors. So it's so hard at times to kind of go with this. The way I describe Lance Armstrong, he was an absolute great liar. He could look people in the eye. He could lie. Now, I will say I put that in about absolute great liar because if you watch him, when he was lying, one of his favorite words was he would say, absolutely. So he'd say, I did not do that. Find out that's what he was lying. But he had this persona that I ride my bike. I work harder than other people. That's why I'm winning. I would never dope. I would never do these things. And when people would say he would destroy them. And they had an absolute machine of how to dope and how to cheat. And he took EPO, he took steroids, all this stuff. And I'm not, this is going to be my enabling part of me here. Lance Armstrong didn't cheat to win. He cheated because everyone, it was to kind of make the field, everybody cheated in cycling. But he was so mean and nasty about it, and he destroyed so many people. And I hope one day that Lance Armstrong will come to a spiritual side, because I think it could be amazing. But we all wanted, but as us as a country, as a world, we were his enablers. We all wanted him. We wanted this story to be true. We wanted to. I remember when back in 2004, when he was, I think, on his 3rd straight tour win, I remember I was at a bike shop getting my bike fixed, and I said, well, that's just such a great story. And they said, he's cheating. And I said, no, he's not. He said he wasn't. Right? And they said, trust me, he's cheating. And I said, well, he's really good. It was just so funny to hear. And oh my gosh, it was so fun to watch it. I mean, I would come home and watch the Tour de France. Who does that in America, right? And but it takes its toll. So the other thing I found interesting was all of his teammates who doped with him, how so many of them finally come out and been awesome. You can just see the relief on them. They just couldn't live with it. It was killing them to be so deceptive. And we know this, right? Us as addicts, when we don't recover, when we can't be honest about what we're doing, when we continue to lie and deceive and make up stuff. And as you remember, we always talk about the addictive thinking. We do lie to a lot of people, but the one we lie to the most is ourselves. And until we can do that, we're never going to recover. And so his quote was, nobody dopes and is honest. That's what he said, of course, before he got caught. He says, the only way you can dope and be honest is if nobody ever asks you, which is not realistic. The second somebody asks you, you lie. It might be one lie because you answer it once, or in my case, it might be 10,000 lies because you answer it 10,000 times. So I transcribed a little bit of his 30 on 30, which is fascinating subject. So the interviewer says, when you were lying like that, what was it like to look at yourself in the mirror? Lance Armstrong, no problem. I'm not defending it or whatever, but I'm telling you it was not a problem. Interviewer, because it was just, I was so used to it, and it was part of the game. You just become immune to that. I mean, it's crazy. It's just crazy to hear myself say that, but it's the truth. How many of us know that one? Are you using? No. Are you drinking? No. Have you been on a computer tonight? No. Why'd you just flip the screen off when I walked in the room? I didn't. Did you just text them again? I didn't text anybody. Are you still talking to such and such who's been abusive to you? Well, no. Maybe. Or maybe the kind of, sort of, maybe, but not really answer. The one thing you always talk about with addicts, we hate the word no. Right? I always laugh about the time I told someone they need to quit drinking, and they went, well, what do you mean? Yeah, you got to stop drinking. So anyway, we talk about these things, self-deception. We lie to ourselves most of the time. Concept of time. I can stop. I'm sure Lance Armstrong said, I don't need to use EPO time. I can stop anytime I need to. But he couldn't. He was addicted to winning. He was addicted to fame. He was addicted to fortune. He had to have money. He had all these things. We miss the cause and effects. I'm not drinking because I'm an addict. I'm drinking because I'm upset, right? Dealing with conflict, admitting errors. Oh, we're so good at admitting errors, aren't we? We could go on here. Confining walls. We keep ourselves safe from everybody, but we don't let anybody in. So I go back to transcribing again. So Lance Armstrong, I could have. So they're talking about why did you finally fess up? So he goes, I could have cut a deal with Travis, and that's the USA Drug Administration leader, because he wanted names. Was that you wanted to protect people? Why did you fight the truth? Like I've already told you numerous times, I'm going to say it again. I wouldn't change anything. So I don't wish I would have made a deal, because if you think about it, there are three potential outcomes here. One, nothing happens. I never get investigated. USADA doesn't investigate me. The feds don't investigate me. I just keep going, and I don't want that. So thank God to hear him say that. Option two is a hybrid. That is where I could be sitting here today, which is if I struck a deal. Travis gives me a suspension. He says nice things about you. Maybe he calls a couple of sponsors to support him. He's going to support us, and you get kind of a pass. Option three is which I chose, where it's like, nope, bleep you. I'm not going to give you a pass. I'm going to kick your bring it on. So I'm going to tell you again, I wouldn't change a thing. Options 1 and 2 don't get me to a place where I am today, sitting right here. I needed a nuclear option, and I got it. How many of us can relate to that? How many of you listening to me right now either need a nuclear option to recover, or you had a nuclear option that helped you to recover? Think about, how do you relate to Lance Armstrong with all of his stuff? Fame, fortune, most recognized athlete on the planet. Everybody wanted a part of him. He's got this awesome gig going. He's got the most beautiful women in the world. He was going through them, one blonde after another. He just, all this stuff, he just was destroying everybody around him. And at least he said, thank God I got out of that. I never enjoyed any of it. I was miserable. I hated everything. I didn't like anyone. I didn't trust anyone. He now claims he's got some of that now. So what do we learn from? Why am I talking about Lance Armstrong today as I lead into the David series? What is important in life? We have to figure that out. I think about this one psychologist was saying, so if I gave you the choice, you can be rich, famous, have everything you want, but you're mean, nobody likes you, and you're alone, or would you rather be, not poor, but not rich, and be seen as lovable, be seen as valuable, and people like you and you like other people? Which one would you choose? We know which one's important. And also, I think from Lance Armstrong's story, we learn how powerful and destructive addiction is. We look at him and go, oh, he had everything. He had everything, but he had nothing. What did it take for him to stop lying and come clean? It took a nuclear option. He had to get caught. So what we have to learn from this is radical honesty is not only good, it's a must for us to recover. And I also hope we can learn from Lance Armstrong's story that you can recover and experience a rich, full, meaningful life. I want to believe that's what he's there now. I think he's still got a ways to go by some of the other things I read. I wish Lance Armstrong could get a spiritual side going. That's what he's missing. David had that. David did lots of things he shouldn't have, but he always had his spiritual side. And your thing is that if I had more time to talk about is Lance Armstrong did not surround himself with healthy people. He surrounded himself with enablers, people who were marketing for him, PR, would lie for him. His entire team, to hear them come out and talk about how miserable they were while they were winning tells us what's important. And it gives me hope about humans when I hear that, when I hear people, when they talk about how miserable they were and what a freeing experience it was when they finally could come clean. So we just have to remember, abandonment and trauma drive us. It's our choice what we do with it. We can turn it into something good to make us more empathetic, more connected, more loving, more caring, or we can live with resentment, anger, addiction, hurts, habits, and hang-ups. It's really what we decide to do with it. I don't wish trauma on anybody. I don't wish abandonment on anybody, but we're all going to have it at some point. It's what we do with it. We cannot turn the clock back. Strengths that go too far become major liabilities. That happened with Lance Armstrong. It happened with David. Their strengths of will to win, talented, smart, all that's great, but when it gets too far, it becomes a problem for us. And I think we need people around us to say stop once in a while. You can't keep doing this. You got to stop. It's not good for you. And then I hope our other conclusion is that God's love wins. If you believe that, you can forgive yourselves, you can forgive others by accepting God's grace for yourself. Once you figure out that God has grace for you, then you can recover. So I thank you for joining me today. Always glad to be here, and it was fun to talk about one of my favorite characters. Still pay attention to him. I keep asking myself why I keep doing this, but he is a fascinating character. And I think he illustrates in so many ways what trauma and abandonment can do to people. And I think I do, if any of you out here are listening that have lots of money, I tell you, I think it's harder to recover when you got lots of money than when you don't. But we can all recover. That's the whole point of NorthStar. We believe that everyone has hurts, habits, and hang-ups. We see this as a disease. It's not about willpower. And we believe that Jesus loves you and loves you way more than anything you've done to harm others. So we meet on Wednesdays and Fridays at 6:30. If you go to our website, NSC Community .com, you can find all of our contact information. Love for you to call. Love for you to stop by. We'd love to have you. So let us close with the prayer of serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace. Taking, as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and next. Amen. Thanks again and have a great week.